Hey guys, this is Mr. Pilla here. Today is Wednesday, May 20th, 2020, and today we're going to be continuing our discussion into alternative forms of energy. Because remember, as I said in the beginning of the week, our goal is to determine what other forms of energy we can get instead of using fossil fuels, so that way we can stop using fossil fuels and that will help reduce climate change, right? Fossil fuels are a direct cause of climate change. If we stop using fossil fuels, we can slow down climate change. And our goal is to figure out what else can we use instead of fossil fuels for our energy needs. Okay? Um, so let's take a look at what the energy sources we came up with so far. All right, the forms of energy we've talked about thus far. We've talked about fossil fuels, all right, and I'm going to focus on the pros and cons of these. So even though we need to move on from fossil fuels, right? It's understood we need to move on from fossil fuels. We cannot rely on fossil fuels, especially because they are the direct cause of climate change, okay? We have to also understand the fact that fossil fuels do come with their advantages. First of all, fossil fuels are inexpensive. They are a cheap energy source, okay? And also, they create large amounts of energy. And with our growing population, we have a growing need for energy, for electricity needs, transportation, all of those energy needs, right? And fossil fuels can supply us with that at a relatively inexpensive cost. And that's fantastic. The issue with fossil fuels, though, as we said before, is that they cause air pollution, which, again, all that carbon dioxide that comes from fossil fuels is a direct cause for climate change. And also the fact that they're non-renewable, okay? Non-renewable meaning that they are limited. We have a limited supply of it. So let's say, for example, fossil fuels never even caused climate change, right? Let's say that wasn't an issue. We would still have a problem with fossil fuels because once we use it up, we're done. Can't do it anymore. It's not an option anymore. And then we would have to find another energy source anyway. So the fact that fossil fuels are non-renewable is a huge disadvantage for them. Let's talk about nuclear energy now. The pros of nuclear energy: they create no air pollution. Okay? So when you run a nuclear power plant, it creates no air pollution, which is fantastic. Okay? We reduce climate change by not creating air pollution. Also, nuclear power plants are capable of producing large amounts of energy, which again, we need large amounts of energy to supply everyone with their energy needs. There are disadvantages, though, of nuclear energy, and we talked about a lot of them, but I'm going to narrow it down to two of them. The nuclear waste. When we use nuclear energy, it creates a waste product that we have no idea what we want to do with. We know we are going to store it in these large caskets, and that's about it. We don't know what to do with it from there. Okay? Also, nuclear energy is non-renewable. And we just got done saying with non-renewable, you have a limited supply of it. So once it's gone, it's gone. It's not an option anymore. So if we solely relied on nuclear power, we would eventually run out of uranium necessary to run it. And we would run into an issue. We would say, okay, we need another energy source. So looking at both of these, wouldn't it be great if we could come up with an alternative means of energy, meaning that it will not contribute to climate change, okay, and have that energy source be renewable, meaning it's unlimited? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about renewable energy sources. All right, and again, today we are talking about renewable energy. Now, when we talk about renewable energy, again, it's from sources that are constantly being formed, meaning we have an unlimited supply of it. You can get more of it, all right? You're not really going to run out. Well, at least for most of these, okay? Some of these, depending on the way you use them, could wind up being non-renewable, but ultimately, as of, as they are mostly considered renewable, okay? There's 5 forms of renewable energy that we're going to talk about: solar, wind, biomass, water, geothermal. Now, before we go any further, one thing I would like to point out about each of these is that, again, while they are considered alternative energy, meaning we won't have to rely on fossil fuels if we use them, meaning they will help slow down climate change and get rid of climate change, there is a reason why we don't use these energy sources as much as other energy sources. Now, these are newer energy sources. These are newer technologies, meaning like the technology is still being developed for these things. But there are definitely disadvantages to each of these types of fuels, and that is something we are going to be talking about. Okay? So let's start with solar. Solar energy is power that comes from the sun. Our sun, in our solar system, puts out tons of energy each and every day. And our goal is to take that energy, capture it, and use it for our energy needs. One of the major ways that we do this is through photovoltaic cells. Photo, meaning light, and voltaic, meaning electricity, are solar panels that are capable of capturing the sun's light and converting it into electricity. All right? One of the major advantages of solar energy is the fact that it creates no air pollution, okay? You're not burning anything like you are with coal and any other fossil fuel. You're just allowing a solar panel to sit in the direction of the sun, capture that sun's light, and make electricity out of it. Now, I'm not going to get into how it makes electricity. Just know that it does, okay? You're not responsible for knowing how, just know that it does. The major disadvantage, though, of solar panels, okay, because while it's fantastic that we have this renewable source, right, because the sun's energy is not going to go out, and once the sun's energy does go out, then, we're not really going to be around long enough to notice that the sun's energy is out, because once the sun's out, we're done. Anyway, we have this renewable energy source that creates no air pollution. That's fantastic. That's exactly what we want. But here's the problem with solar panels. They produce very small electrical currents, meaning they don't produce a lot of energy at a time. In fact, if you were trying to meet the electricity needs of a small city, it would require covering hundreds of acres with solar panels. Think of all the habitats you'd be destroying in the process by just clearing out that land and setting up solar panels. It's not necessarily the best case scenario because you're essentially solving one problem, but you're creating other problems in the process. Despite these limitations, though, solar energy has been becoming increasingly efficient and less expensive in the past couple of years. That's another disadvantage I should actually have mentioned, and you'll be able to see this in the notes, is that they are relatively expensive. Okay? But the efficiency and the expense of these solar panels has gotten better over the years. Is the technology where we want it to be yet? No. Maybe not for developed countries or developed parts of the world. But in developing parts of the world, the solar technology that we have is perfect. In fact, solar cells provide energy for more than 3 million households in the developing world. And that number's growing. You see this link down here, this YouTube link? If you get the chance, I want you to watch it. And you'll see exactly how it is that these solar panels are helping a lot of people in the developing world. Let's move on to the next form of renewable energy. The next type of renewable energy I would like to talk about is wind power. Okay? Wind power, which converts the movement of wind into electric energy, is the fastest growing source in the world. A lot of countries around the world are trying to focus on wind power because they believe that wind power is probably the most sustainable form of renewable energy there is. Okay? let's talk about how it works a little bit. The way that we use wind power is through the use of wind turbines. Wind turbines are used to capture energy from the wind. Huh, we heard that term turbine before. Where'd we hear that from? Oh yeah, when we talked about coal power plants and nuclear power plants, both of those used a turbine. And if you recall, the point of a turbine is to spin. So in this case, the wind turbines spin when the wind blows on them. Inside of the wind turbine is a generator. And when the wind turbine spins, it causes the generator to spin. And when the generator spins, you get electricity. So in this instance, it's just another way of spinning that turbine in order to spin that generator and create electricity. Okay? Wind farms are large areas dedicated to wind turbines. Okay? Now, one thing you might be thinking is, well, if we're using large areas for wind turbines, isn't that the same issue we ran into with solar panels, where we had to use large areas for them as well? This isn't as much of a problem, though, because wind turbines, essentially, you have these large masses that, or these large poles that go upward, and then the turbine itself is up in the atmosphere space, okay? You can still use the land underneath. A lot of farmers and a lot of rural areas that already have land cleared out are able to put these wind turbines up and above them, okay, where they can still use the land below. So we kind of are able to alleviate that problem in that sense. We're also able to put these wind turbines out along coastal areas where you get a lot of wind, okay? And you don't necessarily have to clear out a lot of land space in order to accommodate these wind turbines, okay? Wind turbines also, or wind power also, is non-polluting, meaning it's not going to cause air pollution, which is fantastic. Again, we don't have air pollution that's leading to climate change with these things. So that's a great advantage towards wind power. But again, why don't we see more of this? Well, one of the major problems is that the levels of wind across many places is not necessarily the same. Where you would see a lot of these wind turbines is in rural areas and coastal areas where you're going to get a lot of wind. But where you need the electricity that they gather is in urban areas that you might not necessarily be able to develop these wind turbines for. So the problem comes with how are you going to transport the electricity from the rural areas where you're generating it to the urban areas that need it. Okay? And that's the big concern that wind power currently has right now, is how are you going to get it to those areas that don't necessarily have the wind necessary for it. Okay? But ultimately, this is still the biggest source of renewable energy that's being looked into. It has the most technology dedicated to it, and it is something that we are, as a globe, not just here in the United States, but as a globe, really looking into as a reliable source for energy. All right? Let's move on to our next form of energy. Next, we're going to talk about biomass, power from living things. Now, here's the interesting thing with biomass, because it's so different compared to any of the other renewable resources we're going to talk about. Biomass comes in such a variety of different things, okay? When we talk about biomass as a fuel, we could be talking about plant material like wood. We could be talking about manure, methane, ethanol, even algae, okay? Any kind of organic matter that could be used as an energy source is considered biomass, all right? Now, here's remember I was talking about that exception earlier on where I said pretty much most of these renewable energies we're going to be talking about are renewable. Biomass is the one that kind of goes both ways in terms of being renewable and non-renewable. Because ultimately, depending on the type of fuel you're using, and depending on how fast you're using it, it could very easily become non-renewable. For example, wood is a form of renewable or biomass. Okay, trees they take quite a bit of years, but not millions of years to grow back. A tree's going to grow back in your lifetime. Okay, so in that sense, trees are considered renewable because it doesn't take that long for them to come back. But if we were to use up our trees faster than they could grow back, then they would slide into the non-renewable category because you're using them faster than they can grow back, and if you use them faster than they can come back, then you'll run out of them. Okay, so that's part of the issue with biomass is that they can be renewable, but they could also become non-renewable depending on what you're using. Also, depending on what you're using, the way you get the energy out of them most of the time means you have to burn them. In order to get energy out of wood, you need to burn wood to make a fire, right? Because when you burn that fire, that's how you're creating heat energy. All right, whether that heat is for cooking or just being heated or whatever. Okay, even if you try to run a power plant on wood, you'd have to burn the wood, and burning wood creates carbon dioxide, air pollution, which would cause climate change. Okay, manure, same thing. If you're burning manure, it releases air pollution. Um, Methane and ethanol are very similar in that way. Um, so with a lot of these biomass power energy sources, they are renewable, but you're still getting that air pollution. So biomass isn't necessarily the greatest um, source of energy we should be relying on. There are many places around the world in like developing countries that do rely on wood and manure as a form of energy, but it's not necessarily something that we should fully be invested in, except for the algae part. Now, when I read that first paragraph there, you might have thought algae. Well, how's algae an energy source? Well, very, very recently, within the past couple of years, scientists have been developing ways of using algae as an energy source. And the reason being is that these algae um, create oils, okay? And what we're able to do is we're able to extract the oils off of these algae, okay, and use them as a fuel source. Now, part of the issue is, yes, when you burn the oils that come from these algae, it does release carbon dioxide. But here's the thing. When you're farming this algae, algae take in carbon dioxide. So whatever you're burning, whatever oil you're burning that came from the algae, is the same carbon dioxide they got out of the atmosphere to begin with. So you're not really adding extra carbon dioxide to the atmosphere this way. Okay? Not in the same sense as fossil fuels, because think about it. Fossil fuels are what's buried in the ground. Their carbon that they contain is what they got millions of years ago. It's not the same um, mechanism here, where when you're burning fossil fuels, it's adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. But when you're burning this algae fuel, it's not really adding what was already not there. Okay? And I know that's kind of a little confusing the way I put it, but it is very interesting. And if scientists could make it a sustainable energy source, it's very possible that in the future a lot of our energy source could be coming from algae farms. Okay? But that's enough about biomass. Let's move on to our next renewable energy source. Hydroelectricity, power from moving water. Okay, hydro means water in this sense, so hydroelectricity is energy that comes from moving water. Okay, Now, how is it that we're able to use moving water to generate electricity? Well, there's a number of ways. There's tidal power, which means you're using the movement of tides in order to generate that electricity, or you can build hydroelectric dams over large rivers, okay? And the way that these hydroelectric dams work is that they blockade the water for the river, okay, which ultimately creates a large reservoir behind the dam. And what happens is the water that from the reservoir gets pushed through the dam, okay? Actually, take a look at this image over here. Here's behind the dam, here's the front of the dam. The water in the reservoir gets pushed through the dam, and as it travels through the dam, it travels through a turbine, okay? A hydroelectric turbine. And when the turbine spins because the water is pushing on it, it's attached to a generator, which will also spin. So to kind of repeat that, water is passing through this turbine, the turbine spins, and attached to the turbine is a generator, which also spins, okay? And when the generator spins, that creates electricity. The water that was used to turn the turbine is discharged past the dam to continue on through the river, okay? So why is this a great source of energy? Because one, again, it's renewable. As long as the river's going, it's going to continue to create electricity for you. It does not create air pollution. Nothing in this process is burning, so you're not creating air pollution, okay? But there are major disadvantages to hydroelectric power, especially when you build large hydroelectric dams over top of these rivers. Because when you build these dams over these rivers, they disrupt the surrounding ecosystems. Think about it. When the reservoir builds up behind the dam, all of that water ends up actually flooding nearby areas. So think of all the habitats that were along that river that are now flooded out because of the reservoir buildup. Same thing goes for beyond the dam. The river is actually lower. You get less water going through. That means your rivers are, depleted further along the line. And think of all the habitats, especially within the river, that might be damaged because they're not getting the same type of, water supply they were getting before. All the sediments and all the nutrients that typically would flow down the river. Well, all those sediments are getting stuck behind the dam. So now all that nutrition and all the enriching soils and things like that were flowing down the river now cannot get past the dam and further down along the river. So that affects those habitats and ecosystems as well. Okay? There are other instances, like for example in the northwest of the United States, salmon populations are actually being harmed due to the presence of these large hydroelectric dams. Salmon like to travel upriver, and if they can't get past the dams, then it's going to cause issues for them. Okay, so just the presence of these large dams that block these rivers does cause a lot of harm to the surrounding ecosystems. Okay, one thing though that is being looked into are these micro hydroelectric dams where instead of just building a large dam that blocks an entire river, they're trying to build these turbines that you can essentially float in the river without blocking it. So as the river passes along, it turns your turbine, which generates your electricity, and you're not blocking the river, so you're not really damaging the surrounding ecosystems. All right? One of the issues with that is it might not create as much energy as you want it to if you're building a smaller scale hydroelectric system, but at least you're not destroying the surrounding environment. All right, let's go ahead and talk about our last form of renewable energy. Geothermal energy, which is power from the earth. Geo means earth, thermal means heat. So what you're using is the heat found within the earth to generate your energy. In some areas of the world, underground reservoirs of water in Earth's crust are heated by energy within the Earth. All right? What we do is we take advantage of these underground reservoirs of water because the heat from the Earth is strong enough, essentially, to create that steam effect for us. Okay? And remember, in order to turn our turbine, we need something pushing on it. In this instance, we use the steam that the Earth itself is generating. So what we do is we allow steam to rise through our wells. We use that steam to drive our turbines, and the turbines being attached to the generators will also spin, and the generators will create our energy. And what happens is when we have this leftover cooled down water, we pump it back into the Earth and back into the hot rocks below to be heated up again to be used all over again. Okay? And that's how geothermal energy works. Now, the biggest problem with geothermal energy is two things. One, if you're not careful, you actually could deplete your water source in this way. And then you'd have to pump water from another source in order to go through this process again. So ultimately, it is something that you do need to pay close attention to. Also, there's not a whole lot of areas around the world that are capable of doing something like this. So it's very limited in the sense of where you can do it. You can't just build a geothermal energy plant anywhere. You have to be very specific on where you build it, and it's not many places that you can do this. So it's not necessarily something that can be done on a large scale. All right. All right, guys. Well, that was our lesson on renewable energy. Ultimately, this is the parting message I want you guys to leave with for this lesson, is that with all of these energies, they are definitely fantastic because they are renewable, meaning we won't run out of them, and they are non-polluting. Okay, these are the types of energies we want. Is the technology there for us to do all these things on a large scale? Not yet. We are still building towards that, but we really need to focus on that. We can't just say, oh, it's not what we need, it's not sustainable enough for everyone's energy needs, let's just give up on it. We can't do that. With these technologies, we need to continue to develop them so that way they can become that reality and they can become that energy source that supplies us all with the energy that we need. And then we can ultimately move away from fossil fuels and we can finally reduce climate change. Okay? All right, so that's all I have to say. If you need to watch this video again, please do so. Rewind it as much as you need to so that way you got it down. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will definitely help you out. All right, guys, until next time, talk to you later.